They're going to fight the Germans with what? Balloons. Like party balloons. Oh, okay, different balloons. Okay. And it's going to be explosive and electrifying? I don't get it. March 20th, 1942. In American history, it's one of the most iconic of phrases, and even more so for World War II. And it is in this week of the war that Douglas MacArthur declares, "I shall return." I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week on Java, the Dutch surrendered the East Indies to the Japanese. Rangoon, the Burmese capital, also fell, threatening the terminus of the Burma Road, the only land route left to supply Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese Nationalist army. American commander Douglas MacArthur left the Philippines and was en route to Australia as the week ended. He arrives the 17th. Here's an interesting quote about that from Richard Frank. Make of it what you will. When MacArthur eyes the worn B-17s and fresh-faced crews sent to transport him to Australia, he blew up, demanding better planes. During this wait, he finalized his concept of Philippine command, dividing forces 4 ways, all under his continued control. Wainwright would lead only the forces on Bataan and Corregidor, likely because of doubts about his well-known alcoholism. Once a better set of planes arrived, MacArthur flew out March 17th. Arriving in Darwin, he and his family fly further to Alice Springs at the center of the continent. He then boards a train to Adelaide and at a station tells reporters that he was ordered to Australia by the president, for the purpose, as I understand it, of organizing the American offensive against Japan, a primary objective of which is the relief of the Philippines. I came through, and I shall return. He will end his journey when he reaches Melbourne next week. As for his handling of Philippine command since the Japanese invasion began in December, yep, it's quote week here, MacArthur's learning curve in this first venture in high command was steep, costly, and controversial. MacArthur carried ultimate responsibility for the debacle of the comprehensively inept performance of the FEAF, but both Washington and Brereton contributed heavily towards this disaster. MacArthur's operational handling of his forces likewise reflected significant mistakes, notably the ill-judged arrangements of forces to defend Lingayen Gulf, the premature abandonment of Manila, and the indefensible failure to adequately stockpile supplies on Bataan. However, he also inspired cooperation and performance from Filipinos, both military and civilian, as no other American could. The Philippine Scouts proved the only indigenous force in the colonial possessions of the Western powers who could stand toe-to-toe with the Imperial Army. But even on the 14th, as a partial retreat to Corregidor begins, so too do Americans begin arriving in Australia in large numbers. That same day, the Japanese land on the Solomon Islands, and Australia is now even more under threat, especially if the Japanese build an airfield on Guadalcanal. There is a big meeting of U.S. Army and Navy planners this week about all of this, which I will address next week. Anyhow, those American troops arriving down under are not the only Westerners arriving in the far east of the world. On the 19th, British General William Slim arrives in Burma to take operational command of what will be organized as the First Burma Corps. We've seen him before in both East Africa and Syria. He is the real deal, a very competent soldier and leader. I like this quote about him from Max Hastings. In contrast to almost every other outstanding commander of the war, Slim was a disarmingly normal human being, possessed of notable self-knowledge. He is quite different from much of Britain's higher officers. Lower middle-class upbringing, no college education. He taught school in rough neighborhoods before the First World War, where he fought and was wounded and decorated. Service in the Indian Army between wars. Worked a lot with the Nepalese Gurkhas. He is very methodical in his thinking and his actions. His first job, by his own thinking, is to figure out how to defeat the Japanese. Reasoning that an actual victory over the Japanese could provide the best insight into how to fight them, Slim sought out a Changsha veteran Chinese general and listened attentively as the officer explained that the great Japanese weakness rested in their very thin logistical margins. If a Japanese advance could be contained for 9 days, and they were denied the opportunity to seize Allied supplies, they were then highly vulnerable to counterattack. American Commander Joe Stilwell will call this a lot of crap tactics. I talked a lot about Joe Stilwell last week. He's been recently brought in by the Americans to work with Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese Nationalist. Stilwell wants the Chinese and the British, or even just the Chinese 5th and 6th armies that he now commands, to launch a major offensive to retake Rangoon. Chiang has some real issue with this. The 5th and 6th armies are the only forces he has left that are German-trained. They're also well-equipped, and he does not want them destroyed. Since Japan has naval and aerial supremacy, he wants them deployed near Mandalay, where they can lure the Japanese in, make them overextend their supply lines, and then counterattack. This is what the Chinese have done time and time again, notably at Changsha, as we saw over the new year, and what they advised Slim to do, as I just said. Stilwell also may seriously underestimate just how many of the enemy are in Burma or are soon to arrive. So he and Chiang have a serious clash of visions. Having said that, Chiang thinks the British not very much less arrogant than the Japanese, and that the British are unreliable and might just leave without notice. Remember, he even offered them armies to help defend Burma, and they refused. And he figures if they just decide to suddenly pull out, they might leave the Chinese 5th and 6th to be destroyed. He warns Stilwell of this. But the Burma campaign looks like it still has a ways to go. Japan's conquest of a lot of other territory is finished. Japan's government, though, does not just have to administer the populations of all its territorial gains, it also must try to exploit the material gains and the economics of the co-prosperity sphere. You can get an idea of how that's going to work now on the 14th, when the basic policy is laid down at the liaison conference. There are no restrictions on us. They are enemy possessions. We can take them, do anything we want. This is the industry directive that the agents of Japanese manufacturers will be following as they are sent out to the new imperial lands. The southern region for the present will be a source of raw materials and a market for our manufactured products. Measures will be taken to prevent the development of industry in this area. Wages will be kept as low as possible. The Southern Region Development Bank is being established to finance long-term resource development. But what it will soon actually start doing is to issue currency, and it will become a conduit for the military to put scrip into circulation. See, local Japanese occupying forces are required to be self-sufficient. It is the Southeast Asians that must support Japan's military. This policy was clear before any of these offensives even began. Back in November 1941, a few weeks before they did, Finance Minister Kaya Okinori said that Japan's policy is one of self-sufficiency in the South. Keep the shipment of materials from Japan to that area to the minimum amount necessary to maintain order and to utilize the labor forces there. Ignore for the time being the decline in the value of currency and the economic dislocations that will ensure from this, and in this way, push forward. Pushing forward might not always be the best idea, as certain Red Army troops are finding out in the Soviet Union. Nikolai Klikov took over command of the Soviet Second Shock Army 3 weeks ago, and it was tasked with continuing the Lyuban offensive operation and finally taking Lyuban itself. Klikov got really sick a week ago, though, and Andrei Vlasov has now taken over direct command. He has not broken through the German defenses, but by now he has advanced some 12 kilometers southwest of Lyuban and is over 20 kilometers from the Soviet 54th Army. I mention this now because on the 19th, a German counterattack cuts clean through Second Shock's lifeline, isolating it. Going slightly into the future, Volkov Front Commander Kirill Meretskov whips up a formation from the 54th and with frenzied attacks over the next week manages to save Vlasov's army from total destruction and will restore communications by the end of the month. That German counterattack begins already the 15th. A day before that, the the British War Cabinet Joint Intelligence Committee concludes from German radio traffic as well as airfield construction south of Kharkov that the next major German offensive in the east would be in the south of the Eastern Front. Enigma intercepts give the launch date at May the 15th. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, knowing that an Anglo-American landing in Europe is not yet possible, promises a massive British bomber offensive against German industrial targets. The Soviets will likely get a bunch of assistance also from partisan forces behind enemy lines. On the 16th, German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels writes in his diary, "The activity of the partisans has increased notably in recent weeks. They are conducting a well-organized guerrilla war." On the 14th, a special aerial unit is set up in Bobruisk to identify and bomb partisan camps. It also makes a big anti-partisan sweep, which kicks off the 19th in the Yelnya region. In Operation Bamberg near Bobruisk, Russian villages are set on fire and some 3,500 villagers die. This is just a punitive operation, though, and it serves mostly to make the occupied hate the occupier. Also the 19th, the German army issues a directive to all troops in Serbia and Croatia that wherever Yugoslav partisan activity has taken place, houses and even whole villages are to be destroyed. The British launched something of their own this week on the 20th that is to function behind enemy lines, Operation Outward. This is something that's been in the works for quite a while. What it actually is a hydrogen balloon campaign. These balloons are fairly cheap, and they're sent out to float over Germany. Some have a steel wire trailing behind them that is intended to short-circuit power lines it hits, and some carry incendiary devices that are to start forest fires and things like that. Britain was already well aware early in the war of the potential sabotage to power lines because of repeated complaints from British electric companies when barrage balloons broke free and sabotaged power lines. And already in 1940, the idea of sending balloons carrying bombs from France to Germany was put forward. The fall of France ended that idea, but in September that year, a storm broke a bunch of barrage balloons free and sent them across the North Sea. Some went as far as Finland, and in Sweden and Denmark, they wrecked power lines and even knocked down Sweden's international radio station antenna. Barrage balloons are uncrewed and sort of work like kites, and they defend ground targets from aerial attack by trailing things like steel cables or explosive charges, which are serious hazards for low-flying planes. After the North Sea crossing, Winston Churchill asked for balloons as an offensive weapon versus Germany to be developed. The Admiralty picked it up because the Air Ministry did not think it would be effective, and they started looking at the meteorology involved and found that once you get above 4,900 meters or so, the winds to a great extent blow from west to east. So the Germans would not be able to just do the same thing in return, which is an obvious concern. After tests, which you should really look up and read about yourselves, the chiefs of staff gave the operation the go-ahead last September, and the first balloons are launched today from near Felixstowe in Suffolk. Jumping slightly into the future, a few days from now, there will be reports of forest fires near Berlin and in East Prussia, and there will soon also be Luftwaffe reports of pilots shooting down balloons. Electrical damage and forest fires caused by the balloons will be reported in newspapers in places like occupied Denmark and occupied France, and all of this will cost the Germans money, time, and resources. And the beginning of that operation ends this week. A week of command changes in Burma and the Philippines, danger for a shock army in the USSR, balloons flying out over Germany, and the Japanese claiming total power. Because that's what the liaison conference said. There are no restrictions on us. We can do anything we want. Well, that could be a good thing, right? They could launch a huge infrastructure initiative in the Dutch East Indies. They could bring telephone service to every island in the South Seas. They could build a comprehensive network in Burma, Indochina, or Malaya, all sorts of things like that. And of course, they can get the resources they want by working together with the local populations. They can do anything they want. Let's just hope it doesn't go to their heads. Hey, we have started doing Between Two Wars Season 2 over on our Time Ghost channel, and you should definitely check that out. You can check out the playlist right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Chase Moilanen, or Moilanen. Moilanen. It doesn't sound too Finnish. If you're Finnish, I'm sorry if I'm insulting you. Chase Moilanen. Okay, well, thanks to people like Chase, we can produce all of this content and all of the content over at Time Ghost. For it is the Time Ghost Army that finances all of our content. So join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.